Silas and the Keeper of Silent Things. The key was cold in Silas's hand, a sliver of iron ice against his palm. It was the seventh key of the morning, each one heavier than the last, not in weight but in memory. This one, small and tarnished, with a bow shaped like a teardrop, belonged to the old lighthouse keeper's cottage. It smelled of salt and loneliness. Silas Umber turned it over, his thumb finding the faint, almost invisible engraving. Oddities, 1898. William Staunton, a man who had preferred the company of gulls to people, and who had, in the end, been found by the gulls 3 days after his heart had stuttered to a stop. Silas had been the one to find him. He was always the one to find them. He was the keeper of keys in the town of Anchor's End, a title never officially bestowed but universally acknowledged. When someone died, when a house stood empty and waiting for distant relatives to make decisions they would delay for years, the key found its way to Silas. He would add it to the heavy iron ring he kept behind the counter of his shop, Umber's Oddities and Antiquities, and he would tend to the silent things left behind. His shop was a labyrinth of forgotten stories. Pocket watches that had counted down the final minutes of their owners sat frozen in glass cases. Porcelain dolls with vacant eyes stared from shelves. Books, their spines cracked and leather fragrant with age, whispered secrets to anyone who would listen. Most people in Anchor's End saw only dust and clutter. Silas saw a museum of quiet lives. The bell above the door jangled, a sound so harsh it seemed to physically wound the delicate silence of the shop. Silas flinched, closing his fist around the lighthouse key. A woman stood in the doorway, backlit by the weak morning sun, her form a sharp silhouette against the cobbled street. She wasn't from Anchor's End. He knew every soul in the town, and she was not one of them. She carried the brisk impatience of the outside world like a perfume. "Hello," her voice echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "Mr. Umber." Silas emerged from the shadows behind a cabinet filled with nautical instruments. He did not speak, merely inclined his head, a gesture he had perfected to avoid unnecessary conversation. The woman approached, her eyes scanning the cluttered shelves with a look that was more assessment than appreciation. She was in her late 30s, perhaps, with auburn hair pulled into a severe ponytail and a charcoal gray coat that spoke of city money. "I'm Elara Vance," she said, stopping before the counter. She didn't offer a hand. "William Staunton was my great-uncle." Silas nodded again. He had received the solicitor's letter. The last of the Stauntons was coming to claim her inheritance, such as it was. "I understand you have the key to the cottage," she continued, her tone efficient, devoid of grief. "The solicitor said you'd look after things." Silas reached under the counter and brought forth the heavy iron ring. It held perhaps 24 keys, each a skeleton to a different past. His fingers, long and pale, brushed over them until he found the teardrop-shaped one. He worked it off the ring. The metal felt reluctant. He placed it on the counter between them. It lay there like a challenge. "Thank you," Elara said, scooping it up. It disappeared into her coat pocket. "I'll be sorting through his effects over the next few days. I understand he was a bit of a hoarder. I'll likely have some things to dispose of. The solicitor said you might be interested." Silas's eyes, a pale and watery blue, finally met hers. Dispose of. The words were a physical blow. He saw it then, the future of William Staunton's life. The careful collections of sea glass, the journals filled with weather patterns and bird migrations, the hand-carved pipes, all of it destined for dumpsters and landfill. The silence in the cottage would be broken, not by remembrance, but by the sound of tearing cardboard and the slam of truck doors. "Some things," Silas said, his voice a dry rustle, like pages turning in a long-closed book. "Some things should not be disposed of." Elara's smile was thin, polite. "Sentiment is a luxury, Mr. Umber. One I can't afford. The place needs to be on the market by the end of the month." She glanced at her watch, a sleek silver thing that counted seconds with ruthless efficiency. "I'll be in touch." The bell jangled again as she left, leaving a vacuum of noise that was somehow louder than her presence. Silas stood motionless behind the counter, the cold of the missing key still lingering on his skin. He looked around his shop, at the thousand silent things trusting him to keep their stories safe. William Staunton's things would not be discarded. They couldn't be. Each object was a word in the story of Anchor's End, and Ilara Vance was threatening to tear out a whole chapter. A slow, firm resolve settled in his bones, a feeling as familiar and cold as the keys he kept. He walked to the door and turned the sign from open to closed. The old hinges groaned in sympathy. He had work to do. The silent things were calling, and Silas Umber, their keeper, had always listened. The path to William Staunton's cottage was not a road but a suggestion, worn into the cliffside by a lifetime of solitary footsteps. Silas took it without hesitation, the salt wind pulling at his old waxed coat. Below, the grey sea churned, swallowing the afternoon light. He carried a burlap sack, empty save for a few sheets of tissue paper and a sense of solemn duty. He saw the plume of dust before he saw the cottage. It was a fine grey cloud puffing from the open door, carrying the ancient smell of mothballs, damp wool, and neglect. The sound of brisk, efficient movement echoed from within. Ilara Vance stood in the center of the main room, a dust mask pulled down around her neck, her hands on her hips. Around her, chaos was being born from order. Two large piles dominated the stone floor. One was a growing mountain of black trash bags, swollen with what she deemed worthless. The other was a meager stack of cardboard boxes labeled in Sharpie, auction/maybe. Silas paused in the doorway, a shadow filling the frame. Ilara started, pressing a hand to her chest. "Good God! You move quietly." She frowned, recovering her composure. "I said I'd call you, Mr. Umber. I don't need an audience for this." "I came to help," Silas said, his voice low, meant for the quiet of the room. His eyes were not on her, but on the carnage. A stack of William's journals, their pages filled with a tight, meticulous script, teetered on the edge of the trash pile. A model schooner, its masts carefully rigged with thread, lay on its side in a box marked rubbish. "Help!" Ilara gave a short, humorless laugh. "This isn't a curated selection for your museum of the macabre. It's clearing out a dead man's junk." "It is not junk," Silas said, the words firmer than he intended. He stepped into the room, his presence seeming to absorb the noise. He walked to the journals and carefully lifted them from their precarious perch. The paper was soft, the ink faded to brown. He could smell the pipe tobacco that had seeped into the pages over decades. These are his life, the patterns of the tides, the first sighting of the terns each spring. "They're old papers," Ilara stated, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. She picked up a tarnished silver picture frame from a side table, glanced at the faded photograph of a stern-looking woman, William's long-dead wife, Eleanor, and tossed it into a black bag. The glass cracked with a sickening finality. Silas flinched. The sound was a violation. "Look," Ilara said, wiping her hands on her trousers. "I appreciate that you cared for him, in a way. But this," she gestured around the cramped, overstuffed cottage, "is a liability. It's the past. It's over. My life is in London. This place needs to be empty so I can sell it and be done with it." Silas said nothing. He simply began to work, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that was the antithesis of her frantic efficiency. He ignored her piles. Instead, he went to the small writing desk by the window, its surface cloudy with dust. In the top drawer, he found what he knew would be there: William's spectacles, one arm mended with a careful wrap of copper wire. He wrapped them in tissue paper and placed them in his sack. Next, he went to the hearth. On the mantelpiece was a single, smooth river stone, worn almost flat. William had once told him it was the first thing he'd ever stolen, as a boy, from a beach in Cornwall. He'd carried it for luck for 70 years. Silas's fingers closed around its cool, familiar weight. "What are you doing?" Ilara's voice was sharp. She stopped stuffing a moth-eaten blanket into a bag. "I didn't authorize you to take anything. You said you would dispose of it," Silas said, not turning around. "You are disposing. I am preserving. There is no conflict. It's still my property until it's in your shop and I've accepted a price for it." Silas finally turned to look at her. The pale afternoon light from the window caught the lines on his face, making him look like a carving in old wood. "Some things have a value that cannot be priced, Miss Vance. They only have a home." He moved to a small wooden chest in the corner, its lid inlaid with a simple compass rose. This was William's treasure chest, filled with the flotsam of a life lived by the sea. A whale's tooth, a handful of foreign coins, a lock of hair tied with a faded ribbon. This, Silas knew, was the heart of it. The entire collection would be scattered, the chest itself likely kindling. He knelt and opened the lid. The smell of cedar and memory rose to meet him. "Stop!" Ilara's voice was closer now. She stood over him, her arms crossed. "This is becoming morbid. I want you to leave." Silas ignored her. His fingers, hovering over the treasures, stilled. Tucked into the side of the chest, separate from the other items, was a bundle of letters tied with a faded green ribbon. They were not yellowed with the same age as the journals. The paper was finer, the handwriting on the top envelope a flowing, elegant cursive that was utterly foreign in this masculine nautical space. It was addressed to William Staunton, but at a post office box in Penzance, not here at the cottage. And the return address was in London. The name sent a jolt through Silas. A name he knew from society pages in old newspapers he sometimes used to wrap fragile items. Lady Helena Worth. William Staunton, the recluse lighthouse keeper, receiving letters from a dowager countess. "What is that?" Ilara asked, her curiosity piqued despite herself. She leaned in, her efficient demeanor faltering for a moment. Silas carefully untied the ribbon. The top letter was dated 45 years earlier. "My dearest William," it began. "The rain in London is a dull percussion compared to the symphony of your storms. I count the days until I can escape this gilded cage and stand with you on the cliffs once more. He suspects nothing. The world sees a dutiful wife, but my heart, my wild, treasonous heart, is only ever with you. Silas stopped reading. The air left the room. The crackle of the paper was deafening in the silence. Ilara snatched the letter from his hand. Her eyes scanned the lines, her face a mask of confusion that slowly hardened into something else. Not anger, but a dawning, cold understanding. She looked from the passionate words to the cracked, dusty cottage, to the trash bags filled with the mundane evidence of a lonely old man. This can't be," she whispered. She fumbled for the other letters, her efficient hands suddenly clumsy. She read snippets, her face paling. Lady Helena Worth, she was her family. This would have been a scandal. She looked at Silas, her eyes wide. The brisk, modern woman was gone, replaced by someone who had just seen a crack in the world. He was a lighthouse keeper. Nobody. She was aristocracy. "It seems," Silas said softly, his hand resting on the cedar chest, "you did not know your great-uncle at all." The wind moaned outside, rattling the window pane. The past, so carefully contained and categorized by Ilara Vance, had just broken free of its box. It was no longer just junk to be disposed of. It was a secret, and it was alive. Ilara Vance did not speak for a long time. The only sound was the rustle of expensive paper in her trembling hands and the relentless sigh of the wind off the sea. She read another letter, then another, her earlier efficiency replaced by a slow, dawning reverence. The stern woman from London was receding, and in her place was a startled heir, stumbling upon a truth that rewrote her entire family history. "He never married," she finally said, her voice hushed. It wasn't a question to Silas, but a statement to the dusty air of the cottage. "My grandmother, his sister, always said he was married to the sea. Too set in his ways." She looked up, her eyes finding Silas's. They were no longer sharp with impatience, but clouded with a strange, new confusion. But this was a love affair. A decades-long secret. Silas said nothing. He simply watched the past reassert itself in the room, settling over the piles of trash like a fine, corrective dust. Ilara sank onto a threadbare armchair, its springs groaning in protest. She didn't seem to notice. She held the bundle of letters as if they might dissolve in her grasp. Lady Helena Worth. She died. 10 years ago. There was a huge funeral. A state affair. My God, she was coming here. Her gaze swept the cramped, humble room, trying to superimpose the image of a countess onto the worn hearth and the simple furniture. The world is full of silent things, Miss Vance, Silas said quietly. Not all silences are empty. She looked at him then, truly looked at him for the first time, not as an oddity or an obstruction, but as a repository. Keeper. You knew, she breathed. You knew about this. I knew William was a man who cherished his secrets, Silas corrected gently. I knew the value he placed on certain things. True value. Not the auction price. A flush of shame, or perhaps just the cold, touched her cheeks. She looked at the black bag beside her, the one containing the cracked photograph of Eleanor. With a sudden, jerky movement, she reached in and pulled it out, holding the fractured glass carefully. She was his alibi, Ilara murmured, staring at the stern-faced woman in the picture. Everyone thought he was pining for his dead wife. All this time, he was guarding a different love entirely. She placed the photograph on the arm of the chair, treating it now with a newfound respect. Silas saw the shift in her. The cliff edge of her practicality had crumbled, revealing something more complex underneath. He decided it was time. There is more, he said. Her eyes snapped to his. More. Without a word, Silas went to the writing desk. He ran his fingers along the underside until he found the slight imperfection, a small, smooth depression in the wood worn by a lifetime of touch. He pressed it. With a soft, almost inaudible click, a small, hidden drawer sprung open from the side of the desk. Ilara was on her feet, drawn across the room as if by a magnet. Inside the drawer, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, exquisitely carved bird. A tern, its wings swept back as if in flight. It was made of polished jet, so dark it seemed to drink the light from the room. Beside it lay a single, flawless pearl, set on a simple silver band. A ring. It was too delicate, too fine, to have ever belonged to a fisherman's wife. Ilara reached out a tentative finger but didn't touch it. It's hers, she whispered. It wasn't a question. He kept her secrets, Silas said. And she his. This was their token. A life they could not have, but a love they would not abandon. The weight of it filled the room. The frantic energy of disposal was gone, replaced by a heavy, sacred quiet. Ilara looked from the hidden treasures to the trash bags, her earlier mission now seeming grotesque and sacrilegious. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Close the drawer, Mr. Umber. Silas did, the click of the latch sounding like a period at the end of a sentence. Ilara walked back to the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. She stared at the two piles she had made, the trash and the auction/maybe. The categories were meaningless now. She began, then stopped, shaking her head. I need to think. This changes everything. Silas simply nodded. He picked up his burlap sack, which now held the spectacles, the river stone, and the quiet satisfaction of a story preserved. I'll be at the shop, he said, and turned to leave. Mr. Umber. Her voice stopped him at the door. He looked back. She was standing amidst the chaos she had created, but she looked lost, adrift in a sea of her own making. Thank you, she said, the words seeming unfamiliar on her tongue. For not letting me throw it all away. Silas gave a slow, single nod. The silent things give thanks enough. He stepped out into the buffeting wind, leaving Ilara Vance alone with the ghosts she had almost evicted. The cottage was no longer a liability to be cleared. It was a shrine she had almost desecrated. And as the door closed behind him, Silas knew the work for the day was done. The past was safe. For now. The bell on the door of Umber's Oddities was a gentler sound this time. It was late afternoon, and the light through the dusty windows had softened to a deep gold, setting the motes of dust dancing like slow fireflies. Silas was at the back, carefully cleaning the lenses of William Staunton's spectacles with a soft cloth, restoring a little clarity to the glass. Elara Vance stepped inside. She moved differently. The city-honed briskness was gone, replaced by a hesitant, almost reverent pace. She carried a single cardboard box, holding it carefully with both hands. She placed the box on the counter between them. It was the one she had labeled auction/maybe. "I've reconsidered," she said, her voice quieter than before. She looked around the shop, and this time her gaze was not one of assessment, but of wonder. She was seeing it through new eyes, Silas's eyes. She was seeing the museum. Silas placed the spectacles down and looked at the box. He did not open it. "It's not everything," she continued, folding her arms as if suddenly cold. "But it's a start. The journals. The model ship. The photograph of Eleanor." She swallowed. "I kept the letters. And the things from the drawer. I need to understand them first." "Understanding is a slow tide," Silas said. "It cannot be rushed." A faint, genuine smile touched her lips. "You speak in riddles, Mr. Umber." "I speak in truths. They often sound the same." She nodded, accepting this. Her eyes wandered over the crowded shelves, lingering on a music box with a ballerina whose paint was faded, on a collection of antique keys not unlike the one Silas had given her. "What happens to it all?" she asked, her voice filled with a new curiosity. "I mean truly. People bring you these things. These silent things. And then what? They just sit here. They wait," Silas corrected softly. He reached out and tapped the glass case that held the pocket watches. "They are not lost. They are waiting." Waiting for what? For the right person to find them. For the story to need to be told again. He looked at her, his pale eyes holding hers. "Like William's story found you." Elara absorbed this. She looked down at the box on the counter, then back at Silas. "The cottage," she said, the businesswoman in her making a final, struggling appearance. "I still have to sell it. It's a prime coastal property." "The value?" Silas said nothing. He simply waited. She let out a long breath, the practical argument dying on her lips. "But not yet. Not like this. I'll have it cleaned. Properly cleaned. Not disposed of." She looked at the box again. "I suppose I'll need to find a place for this too. Eventually." A silence fell between them, comfortable this time. It was Elara who broke it. "There are other houses," she said, almost to herself. "Other keys on your ring. Do they all hold stories like this?" "Every key opens a door," Silas said. "And behind every door is a world." She was silent for a long moment, watching the golden light fade from the window. The weight of the town's collective memory seemed to press in from the shadows of the shop. "It must be a heavy burden," she said finally, "being the keeper of all these silent things." Silas picked up William Staunton's spectacles. He held them up, and for a moment, the world through the cleaned lenses was clear and sharp, before he folded them and placed them gently inside the glass case with the stopped watches. "It is not a burden," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It is a privilege." The bell on the door chimed softly as Elara left, leaving the box on the counter. Silas did not open it immediately. He simply rested his hand on its lid, feeling the faint hum of the stories inside, settling into their new home. Outside, the first light of a single star pricked the violet sky over Anchor's End. In the shop, 1,000 silent things held their breath, waiting. And their keeper, Silas Umber, began to listen. The silence Elara left behind was different. It was no longer the empty quiet of a shop at closing time, but a watchful, patient stillness. The box on the counter seemed to pulse with a soft energy, a heart transplanted from a cliffside cottage into the chest of Silas's museum. He did not open it immediately. Ritual was important. He first lit a single kerosene lamp, its warm orange glow pushing back the encroaching twilight and painting dancing shadows on the walls. The electric lights were too harsh for this work. They scared the subtle truths away. Then, and only then, did he carefully slice the tape on the box with a bone-handled letter opener. He folded back the flaps. The top item was the photograph of Eleanor Staunton in its cracked frame. Silas lifted it out, his touch reverent. He used a soft cloth to wipe the dust from the glass, careful around the spiderweb of fractures. The woman's stern gaze seemed to soften in the lamplight. She had been a keeper of secrets too in her way, a willing accomplice to a grand hidden love. He placed her on a high shelf overlooking the shop. A matriarch granted a new watch. Next came the journals. He stacked them neatly, their leather covers cool and familiar. These would not be for sale. They would join his own private collection, a reference library of lives lived in Anchor's End. He ran his thumb over the date embossed on one cover. Star 1947 star. A year of great storms. William would have had much to write about. Finally he reached the model schooner. It was a beautiful thing about a foot long, its hull carved from a single piece of dark teak. The sails were delicate linen, now yellowed with age. One of the tiny rigging lines had snapped. Silas held it up, turning it slowly in the lamplight. This was not just a model. It was the Aria, the ship William's father had sailed, the ship he had dreamed of escaping on as a young man. It was a dream rendered in wood and thread. He found a clear space on a shelf between a collection of antique sextants and a music box shaped like a lighthouse. It was the perfect spot. As he set the schooner down, his elbow brushed against a small porcelain hair that had been sitting precariously on the edge. The figurine teetered, then fell. Silas moved with an old man's slowness but a librarian's precision. His hand shot out not to catch the hair but to cushion its fall. It landed softly in his palm. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was then that he saw it. The hair had been sitting on a small, folded square of paper, tucked away behind a stack of old ledgers. It must have been dislodged weeks, maybe months ago, and the hair had been placed on top, hiding it completely. Frowning, Silas picked up the paper. It was thick, expensive stationery but brittle with age. It had been folded and refolded countless times. This was not part of his inventory. He knew every item, every scrap of paper in his care. This was an intruder. He carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was not the tight, nautical script of William Staunton. It was looping, elegant and frantic. The ink was faded to a rusty brown, but the emotion in the words was shockingly fresh. "My dearest D," it began. Asterisk, he knows. God help me, he knows everything. He found the letters. His rage is a living thing. I have locked myself in the blue room. He says he will ruin you, that he will see you driven from this town and your name blackened forever. Do not come to me. Do not try to write. He intercepts everything. Meet me at the usual place tomorrow night after the moon sets. We must leave this place. There is no other way. Bring only what you can carry. My love, I am so afraid. Asterisk. There was no date, no last name, just a single initialed cry of desperation. Hidden behind a ledger and guarded by a porcelain hair for who knew how long. Silas's heart, a slow and steady drum most days, gave a hard, painful thump against his ribs. Asterisk, he will ruin you. Driven from this town. Asterisk. This was not a love story like William's. This was something darker. A story of fear and threat. A story that spoke of a meeting that may or may not have ever happened. A story that ended, where? He looked at the initial, A. And the recipient, E. His eyes drifted up to the high shelf, to the photograph of the stern-faced woman he had just placed there. Eleanor Staunton, E. The pieces, sharp and dangerous, began to click together in his mind. The hidden drawer in William's desk was for a countess. But this hidden note was for a different secret entirely. A more dangerous one. The keeper of silent things stood in his shop, the frantic words of a long-ago letter burning in his hand. He had believed his job was to preserve the past. But this was not a memory to be shelved and admired. This was a thread, pulled from a tapestry he thought he understood, and it threatened to unravel everything. Someone had been afraid. Someone had been threatened. And the note had been hidden, not in a lover's cottage but here, in his shop. The silence in Umber's Oddities was no longer patient. It was holding its breath.